What I have decided to do in the context of some of the conversation of framing yesterday is to start talking about something that is really important and happening in our context in our world. And I thought that it might be useful for us as communicators, brand activists, and business influencers to have a conversation about. And the topic that I've chosen to speak about today is the question around leader versus challenger brands. This is a reality that is happening around the world and on the continent, where we've got brands that are strong, have had presence in markets and dominated categories and industries for a long time, being disrupted by new, young, emerging challengers. And certainly this is happening around the world and on this beautiful continent of ours. And I thought that this might be a useful conversation for us to really apply our minds and to start thinking about with respect to leader versus challenger brands, and ultimately, based on what we are seeing, who do we think will win this battle for market share, for customers, and for share of countries? But I also want to set out the context that says that the word brand is a proxy, not just for companies and brands, it's a proxy for the continent. We're a brand as a continent, challenging and trying to get our share of voice on the global stage. It's a proxy for us as communicators. It's a proxy for some of the discussions that we had yesterday about new media, existing media, what platforms do we have to communicate? It's a proxy for donors and people that are looking for donor investment and donor funding. They're up against challengers and leaders on a global context. So I think this is quite a useful conversation for us to have, because there are some really specific insights that impact us as communicators, brand activists, and business influencers. And so the starting point is then to define what are leaders and what are challengers. And typically, leaders are brands or businesses that have a dominant market share in specific categories and specific industries. They have a strong history and heritage, have spent a lot of time and investment building those categories and those industries. Strong brand heritage, and also lots of scale and trust. And I use the word trust in inverted commas because I'll talk about the concept of old trust versus new trust in a moment. So those are leader brands, and we know globally, you'll identify some of the brands that you're seeing on screen, brands that are leaders, that have been in market, have grown industries, have developed value chains, and are really growing their businesses multiple-fold. And even on the continent, Tebe talked yesterday about the most valuable brands on the continent. And certainly there are brands that are leaders, clear leaders, with strong value propositions, strong dominance in those markets, and really making a difference and impact in society, countries, and the continent at large. And so that really is the landscape of what we call the leader brands. And I can talk a lot more about leader brands. But the reality is that there is the rise of challenger brands. And challenger brands are coming fast and hard. And challenger brands, by their very nature, are brands that are there to challenge the status quo, to find opportunities that actually they see confines in current industries, current categories, and they're redefining the rules of categories, industries. And what is also interesting is challenger brands have a unique point of view, and they take strong leadership positions on things they fundamentally believe in. And their purpose is to challenge and disrupt convention. And I've listed a couple there. So Dove wants to disrupt the whole thing about beauty. If you think about Netflix, they wanted to disrupt. So the whole thing is about, and their mindset and their outlook is that current industries, current categories, there's a level of unfairness. And their role is to help drive innovation and serve customers better through that piece.
We definitely thought of ourselves as a challenger brand, as sort of outsiders that were taking a fresh look at an industry that we felt needed massive change.
If you're not willing to stand up to the big boys and show a different way, I don't know, you just get lost, I guess.
There's a very rigid segmentation. This is a rum, this is a whiskey.
Can you get volume?
And I found it very easy to go in and just mess with that because no one had it.
No one thought, anyone in the world would go and stay with, someone in their home. That it was such a, a scary idea.
Can we get volume, please?
We proved that actually it's not a scary idea. It's something that people want to be doing.
You're supposed to have perceived the brand the same way wherever you meet them. But here we wanted to do something different.
We're here to transform this industry. We aren't necessarily here just to sell glasses online.
To make other people as passionate about great craft beer as we are.
To improve children's lives through developing healthy relationships with food.
We're going to go and try and get 400 people their jobs back.
We think it's a competitive advantage to spend less, force you to be smarter, force you to innovate.
We're very happy to steal ideas from anywhere that we can.
The big foot on the pack, we've run that in The Guardian. Haven't we run that in The Guardian? There's some very political statements, and brands don't do that.
We said, if you don't publish these ads as is, we will go to press.
We've really focused on doing kind of edgy, slightly provocative PR. But they've all been done because it gives us a platform to get our ideas across about beer.
So what you see there are challenger brands that have gone into specific categories and industries with a real purpose to gain market share and to defy conventions. And the most interesting thing about challenger brands is that they don't have the legacy and all the cultural and structural and IT complexity that long-established leader brands have, and they're a lot more agile. They're making decisions at pace and at scale, and certainly at the center of it is this massive thing around a cause and a purpose that really drives what they do. And so what you're starting to see is that leader brands typically are about maintaining the status quo within the category and really trying to drive that because that's where they've been strong traditionally and that's where they've made their muscle. And what you see is challenger brands are really about progressing the category and really disrupting the category and moving and changing behavior. So if you think about Netflix, if you think about Uber, if you think about Airbnb, at its core is also about fundamentally changing consumer behavior. And a real tension then starts to happen because what do leader brands do in the context of this evolving change, evolving disruption, and these blurred lines between traditional business and the new world? And so what you start to see is that a lot of leader brands also start to get involved in supporting legislation and regulation that protects the very category where they dominate, because they can see the threat of all of these new and emerging challenger brands that are coming. And absolutely challenger brands are stealing market share and driving growth. And if you look at trends globally, $22 billion worth of value has moved from leader brands to challenger brands. What you also see, and this chart shows the venture capitalists funding and investment has increased triple-fold to brands that are challengers. And people are investing a lot of money, not just globally, but also on the continent, in young startup challenger brands in order to get higher returns because they absolutely see the value of those brands in terms of how they're driving forward. And it's not just in one industry, it's across multiple industries. All industries are being disrupted by the emergence of these young challengers. And there's just some examples of different firms and investment. And certainly the world has changed. A lot of things have changed. The disruption, technology, and what technology has done has been absolutely amazing. I always tell the story that I have an 11-year-old son, but when he was 2, we were at my parents' house, and a life-changing moment happened. the landline rang. And my son kind of heard the sound, and he kind of walked towards the landline. And I stood there looking at my son, looking at the landline, and I realized that he will never know like what it was like to live in an era where we actually phoned a place, not a person. And these digital natives, the world has fundamentally changed. And we can see this. People don't trust brands. People trust peers. And so how we write our content, how we communicate, what we say, how we say it, is absolutely important. But it's not just about what we say. It's about actually doing versus telling. And that's what people want to see from brands. Research, and we talk about research because research is at the heart of it all. You can't come, I think there's a big debate happening about universal human truths and, Africa is not a country. And we've got to invest the time to understand the nuances, what customers want, what they're looking for, and really try to develop solutions that are built on what they want. There was a survey done across 5 countries on the continent about what the things that are most important to people across the continent. Number 1, family. Number 1. Number 2, God. And we see the rise of religion in all of our research and the amount of time people are spending in church across the board on the continent, an average of around 12 hours a week in church. Health. Hey, for those watching this, I always worry about where love kicks in terms of its relative importance, but that's another talk for another day. But research is absolutely important. We talked earlier on about the communications and the marketing profession. And there's a very wonderful book called The Business of Influence. And the book chapter 1 starts with what is the definition of marketing? And it goes on to say that the AA in the Association of Marketing in America defines it as this, the European Association defines it as that, and then it goes on to talk about all the various definitions of what marketing it is. It then says, what is the definition of PR? And it quotes about 5 different definitions of what PR. Then it says, what's the definition of communications? And then it goes, what's the relationship between all of these things? And then it ends with confused. And then it says, no wonder nobody takes us seriously, because we amongst ourselves can't even define what the definitions of these things are. And then he says, if I were an alien or somebody new who came onto the planet trying to understand brand, communications, PR, and I asked myself one simple question, what are we all trying to do? And he says, and that's the end of chapter 1, I would have to come to the conclusion that we are all in the business of influence. And the book is called The Business of Influence, and it's got a wonderful model that talks about the role that we play in helping to influence the market stakeholders, investors, analysts across the different stakeholder list. And I think this is so important because our role is about influence. But how do you track influence? How do you measure influence? And I think we've got to do a lot of work to make sure that we can really stay true to that. But the other point is business. Our role has to be seen as a strategic enabler of business. And the more we are shifting away from the link back to business and business metrics and business outcomes, I think we're really not doing ourselves justice. Because it is a difficult place and a difficult space for us as a community. And it's a little bit like, I always use the example, what is the measure of success of the CIA? And the measure of success of the CIA is when there's been no events. Because they've been intelligent, they've now thwarted all the different attacks and all the different plottings, but nothing has happened. And therefore, people don't see the value because they haven't seen anything happen. And it's a little bit like that in terms of the role that we play. But we certainly have to bring that business perspective forward in a much more compelling way. The other great book is Rethinking Reputation, and it talks about how PR trumps marketing, advertising, PR, and we all know that you can have a 174-year-old business that is built and in 5 seconds, that entire thing can tumble because of something that or someone has done in your business. So really great. But the question then is, are leader brands really, really on the ropes? When you look at traditional leaders, you look at the rise and emergence of challenger brands, are leader brands really, really in trouble? And I think a lot of the data suggests the opposite, which is actually big brands are actually getting bigger, making a hell of a lot more money. And even the new emerging, now leader brands like Facebook, Apple, etc., are now becoming the first billion-dollar companies. So the research is suggesting that some of these leader brands who do specific things are actually getting bigger. And we can talk about why we think that's happening. But not all of the leader brands are. A lot of brands that have been leaders have actually seen their demise. And there's a lot of brands that we are seeing. I mean, if I just look on this list, traditional bookstores. In South Africa, we've got one called Exclusive Books. 33% down sales year on year. I'm not sure who still goes to Mr. Video anymore to hire videos. And certainly if people don't change and drive some of that change in their organizations, looking at the market, looking at the shifts in the market, we certainly are in trouble. And so the fundamental question then is who will win in this battle, as it were, between leader brands and challenger brands? And our point of view is that there is no right answer, but the one answer that we can say for sure is that the people and the brands that will win are brands that adopt a challenger mindset. So even if you're a brand that is like Old Mutual, 174 years old, you've got to start thinking like a challenger and start applying some of the principles of a challenger into your business. So we argue that it is absolutely about developing a challenger mindset. And that's where the value is over time. Because successful brands and businesses have to have this divine discontent. They talk about the All Blacks, the rugby team, and why they always win. And they talk about they have this thing called divine discontent. Even when they are winning, they go back, they review what went wrong. And so this whole thing about brands that are successful and leaders have got to review and challenge themselves to say, what else can we do to kind of help build more leverage, gain more market share, disrupt ourselves? And I don't know about the strategy of Coca-Cola, for example, our co-partners in this initiative. But I suspect when they have crafted their strategy around the portfolio, they looked at the market, they looked at the data, and they said, we are going to build a portfolio of brands that have specific roles that those brands must play in the market. And therefore, I would imagine that Coke, the mother brand, is the cash cow, and they realize that that's the strength of where the equity of the brand is. But they realize that people are moving off sugar. And therefore, they have to build a product and a proposition for a market for the future. And that's why they have now developed strategies to make sure that they can build relevance over time. And we're not just seeing this in one area, we're seeing it in other industries as well. This is Eagle Lager from Uganda. And they also challenged themselves and disrupted their own business. And the whole convention of beer must be made from hops and wheat, and this is one of the first clear beers in the world. Currently number 2 with over 30% market share. So the whole thing about challenging convention, challenging yourself, and having a challenger mindset, we believe is certainly a key ingredient for moving into the future. So to talk about Old Mutual for a little bit, because I have to pay the bills, Old Mutual is a business that's been around for 174 years, started in Cape Town in South Africa, and we now operate in 14 countries on the continent with over 31,000 employees, 11.6 million customers, and really growing across all the regions on the continent. And one of the big conversations with us has been when you're an organization that is old as we are, where you have built infrastructure to service customers over time, and you have a business model that has served us well for the last 174 years, is it sustainable moving into the future? And so a core part of the challenge for us is that we are a business that actually people say is for older people in terms of our brand. We don't appeal to the markets that matter to us the most, which is the young market, so the youth, as well as the people that do have money. The middle market actually don't prefer us. They prefer other more premium brands, as it were. And in fact, one of the longest debates that I had with my CEO was a real question, which was, should we change the name? Because we have the little matter of old in our name. And it was a real debate. Should we change the name? And he said, look, you need to give me the answer here, because if we're going to list this company back on the continent, and I need to tell our board whether or not we will list this company under a different name. And my answer to him was, I think we would be silly to lose an equity of 174 years. What we have to do is we have to make sure that we develop a strategy that can make sure that our brand is successful into the future. And the example that I used with him was, there is a movie, all of us, there is a movie that we all go and see every year for which outcome we already know. We pay money every year, or however often, to watch a movie for which outcome we all already know. That movie is James Bond. It's the same story. It's about a guy who drinks a martini, kills the bad guy to get the girl. That's the same story. It's the same story. We go and we pay money every time it comes out. It's the same script. But what they've managed to do is keep the essence of the brand the same, but kept it relevant and up to date with the times. So they up the tech, they up all of the digital platforms which they market, but fundamentally at its core, it's the same narrative. And in fact, if you look at the sales have gone through the roof since Daniel Craig kind of took on the role. And yesterday there was a big announcement that the next one is coming out in April next year, and it's going to be called No Time to Die. But the point I'm making is, in our discussion with the CEO, the conversation was, we've got to stay true to who Old Mutual is, but make sure that we keep it relevant, up to date. We challenge convention about our core business on a number of levels, one of which is the brand, and I'll talk you through the brand work. Another is our very inherent business model. So our business model as a financial services company in insurance is that we have advisors. We have a distribution force. In South Africa, we've got almost 10,000 advisors who deal with face-to-face engagement. But the data points tell us not everybody wants to speak to an advisor. So what do we do with online? Some people want to go direct online. So how do you build a distribution channel that is fundamentally at odds with your core traditional way in which you've built this business over 174 years? And these are some of the things that we've had to challenge ourselves on. And so we've been on a journey to really challenge ourselves and challenge our convention, and to build that challenger mindset to say, how can we really look at things from a different perspective? And one of the things that we've said is we are no longer a South African company doing business in the rest of Africa. We are a Pan-African company and a Pan-African brand. That's a fundamentally different mindset. We can no longer take solutions from South Africa and hope that they will work in Nigeria. I told the story about funeral yesterday in Nigeria. Those things cannot work. We've got to stay true, and the solutions have got to be built from the ground up. But one of the big things for us has been culture. And we've spent a lot of time talking about culture, because you can't develop a challenger mindset without looking at what your culture is, because culture is the single biggest unlock, especially for companies that have been around for a long time. So we had a program called Project Pulse, which talks to the pulse, which is the heartbeat of the organization. And we brought in the top 250 leaders from across all of our countries, and we had a 4-day workshop in Cape Town. And we spent the first day talking about what are some of the great things that are in our organization that we must take forward. And there were lots of things that is great about our organization. But we also talked about what are the things that are holding us back as a company. And there were a lot of things that are holding us back. You know, I'll talk about 3. One of the biggest things that are holding us back is the pace of decision making. The 250 top leaders were talking about how frustrated they are at the pace of decision making in the organization. And we said, how can we unlock faster decision making? And a part of the process, we looked at global best practice. We had a great partner who was helping us through this process. And they brought in lots of international best practice and examples of what other companies are doing to really help drive faster decision making. And one of the examples which we adopted was from Amazon. And Jeff Bezos talks about this concept of type 1 and type 2 decision making. Type 1 decisions are decisions that are irreversible. Once you walk through that door, you can't go back. But type 2 decisions are reversible. You can change your mind. And Jeff Bezos writes in 2016, Amazon, as big a company as we are, we make between 10 to 15 type 1 decisions a year. Decisions that are irreversible. The rest of them are reversible. They can change their minds. And so they have a very different governance structure for type 2. They are 30% of the way there and they start implementing. For type 1, there's a whole thing that they do, which is strict. There's governance, there's a board thing. And the point that they were trying to tell us is in our company, and lots of leader and history companies, we treat every decision like a type 1. It needs this forum, that committee, this thing, that thing over there. But actually, we can unlock faster decision making because if you really think about it, some of the decisions are, we can change our minds. And so we've now adopted some of those principles to say, how do we unlock faster decision making? We talked about trusting experts, and certainly marketing, comms, and brand is one of those where we aren't really trusted. They bring us in as experts, but then we manage decision making by committee. And so we've got to make sure that we are allowing the experts to really drive the decision making. And we certainly are a long way in terms of that journey. One of the other big decisions at a cultural level has been the shift from being product-led to being customer-led. And there's a standing joke in the insurance industry, what's the difference between marketers and actuaries? Marketers don't think they're actuaries. The point is that in our business, being product-led, the actuarial functions are the ones that drive the business. But actually, what needs to drive the business is what the customers want. And therefore, the whole move to customer centricity is a key part of what we want to drive. And if you've made that decision, it cannot be that you start with the product. You've got to start with the customer. And there's a whole program of how we'll bring customers into the conversation. So, Cultural Journey, great book. Patty from Netflix wrote a great book, and we've had conversations around culture. And this book talks about the culture at Netflix, which is built on 2 things, freedom and accountability. They've got 2 things that drive that whole business, freedom and accountability. So what do you think their leave policy is? Take leave. What do you think their maternity policy is? Do what's right for the baby. So there's a whole thing about freedom and accountability, and especially in big and large organizations, how do you start enabling some of these cultural changes and shifts that will really help to unlock some of that challenger mindset that I spoke about earlier? And so we then signed up as a leadership team that we will drive the cultural change that is required to really unlock value for the organization. And there was this big chart that was created, and all of our leadership signed on it, and we are on a journey to really make sure that the culture piece will really be a key enabler for us to deliver on our strategy. Because strategies are great, but they're delivered through people. And you've got to make sure that you align the people to the cause that you're trying to drive. And then we did work on the brand, and our brand is great brand, as I said, strong equity in the market, but we hadn't really seen a shift in our brand over time. And so we said, what can we do to make sure that we reinvigorate the brand, but that we take into account our context of Africa? And so through the brand work that we did, we developed a new persona for the brand that you see on the screen. And it starts with the sentence, "We are a vibrant and inspiring brand." You would never use the word Old Mutual and vibrant in the same sentence. And it talks about Afro-optimism, it talks about wisdom born of experience, it talks about solutions, African ingenuity. And in the EXCO presentation, where we were sharing the new brand strategy, we probably spent about 30 minutes just on this one slide. And one of the big debates, or one of the questions that was asked was, is a brand a personification and manifestation of who you are, or is a brand a personification and manifestation of who you want to be? And that debate went on for at least half an hour, talking about, this whole conversation about balance, are we going to portray ourselves as something that we're not, or how we're going to stand, what is our position? And it was quite an interesting discussion. And in the discussion, we used Volvo as an example, who say their positioning is all about safety. And the debate was, surely Volvo weren't unsafe, and then they said they were going to be safe. And that was quite an interesting thing. But our point of view was, it's got to be true to who you are, but at some point you've got to take a position and then build and do everything to build on that positioning that you've taken. And that's why Volvo, for example, announced 2 years ago that in 2020, they will develop the first death-proof car in the world that really reinforces the whole thing around safety. And then we said there's 5 pillars of our strategy: to be more connected, more meaningful, more distinctive, more believable, and more consistent. And there's streams of work that are helping us to drive this across the board. And if you looked at our brand identity over a year ago, very inconsistent, very fragmented, and we used to tell everybody the only color you can use is green. So there were 50 shades of green. And so we went through a whole process to say the visual identity. Yesterday I talked about the role of financial services is to help bridge the gap between people's hopes and dreams and their reality. And based on that, we kind of worked on a new identity. We created the gap, and we did some amazing things. We split the logo. We brought more color. We said people can bring a lot more color and vibrancy into the brand. In Zimbabwe, they called it color blocking. So the guy is wearing blue, the gradient line is blue. So we started doing some interesting things with the brand. We went and took photography in every single country where we operate, because our imagery, we said, must be. When I travel, I don't want to see South Africans in the images of Rwanda. It's got to be the local people. So we went and did local photography. We did research, and really, really exciting new stuff. In East Africa, we operate as UAP, Old Mutual, and certainly the consistency in the brand across the continent was very, very important for us. I think you kind of get the picture. So we spent, Thank you very much. Thank you. And another big part of this is we said that this cannot be lipstick on a pig. We've got a great and inspiring and vibrant brand externally, but the customer experience sucks. So we're investing a lot of time on the customer experience, and we're investing a lot of time in a pipeline of innovation. And the innovation has to come from other parts of the continent. We've got some amazing things that we're doing in healthcare in East Africa. We've got a great partnership with EcoBank in West Africa, and some of the innovations at a product level are important because a funky brand means nothing if people can't experience and get something that's valuable. So the focus on customer value propositions is absolutely key. And so the premise of where we are, in conclusion, is to say that companies that will win in the future are companies that focus on three things. The first thing is having a challenger mindset with a purpose, with a very clear purpose, and really making sure you're challenging yourselves, challenging the culture, challenging convention of what has got you to the place where you are. The second piece is a unique brand of service, and a focus on customer experience is absolutely fundamental. And by the way, when you're competing on experience, you're not just competing in your own category. We're in financial services, but when we look at our app, it must be competing with Uber, because people have an Uber experience, they expect that same level and quality of experience across any other app they interact with. So the focus on customer experience is absolutely key. And the third piece is brands that are successful have an enviable people brand. Their people are great ambassadors for the brand, they're aligned to the purpose, and certainly we believe that those three components will be a key attributes of companies that are successful moving into the future. And if you focus on those three things and communicate well, we certainly believe that the money will flow. The money will flow, and the role that we play in that is absolutely critical. So there's been lots of articles written about challenger brands. I'd like to recommend these. There's a guy called Adam Morgan for a company called Eat Big Fish. We've done work with them, and they've been part of the journey with us. And really the challenger project and the challenger mindset is absolutely a key piece for what we all need to kind of move forward. So there are amazing things happening. There's so much change happening in our industry, in our category, across both the brand side, agency side, the community side, across all the piece. And I think forums like this really help us to come together and talk about our unique point of view and what that future needs to look like. And perhaps we don't have all the answers, and certainly at Old Mutual, we don't have all the answers. But what is clear is that solutions for Africa must come from Africa. And that's what we advocate, that we've got to make sure that we drive African ingenuity. I always look with interest at all of the national country plans and how well some of them are articulated. I think in Kenya, it's the Big Five. I think it's called the Big Five, and it's really well articulated. And other country plans that are really well articulated. But we haven't really thought about what's the continental plan that talks about the value and the proposition for Africa on the global stage. And I think conversations like this are just the beginning of how we can collaborate, have conversations together to make sure that we develop those solutions for this beautiful continent of ours, but also that we build the credibility of us as professionals. Because ultimately, when writing a story, make sure that you're holding the pen. And part of this process for us is about making sure that we hand the pen to ourselves so we can craft that story and that narrative around our profession, around the markets where we operate, and this beautiful continent of ours. Thank you very much.